Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's. At Local Joe's, we help local business. Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's.
This is City Pulse Newsmakers, a weekly look at the issues and the people behind them in Greater Lansing. Brought to you by City Pulse, Lansing's weekly alternative newspaper. And now, here's your host, City Pulse publisher, Burl Schwartz.
Good morning. We woke up to a new political reality on Wednesday, and Michigan played a big part in it. What does it mean, and how did it happen? We've assembled a panel today of two state senators. We've got Curtis Hertel, a Democrat, and Rick Jones, a Republican. Welcome back to both of you gentlemen.
Thank you.
And the political odd couple of Michigan, we've got John Truscott and Kelly Rossman McKinney from the firm Truscott Rossman, the PR firm. Welcome to both of you.
Well, thanks, although we've never been called the odd couple before, so thanks a lot for us.
It's a new era.
Oh, you working you?
I was going to go with James Carville and Mary Madeline, but it's confusing because one of you're the wrong person to be James Carville. So.
In so many ways, but okay, we'll let it go at that.
All right, so let's talk about what happened. Rick, I want to start with you. So, were you surprised at the Trump
I was
victory?
surprised that Trump won Michigan. I wasn't surprised he won. Actually, my district's very blue collar. So typically, if I go to a Friday night fish dinner at the Eagles, the Moose, or the American Legion, I talk to a lot of General Motors workers or retirees. And overwhelmingly, they were telling me I'm going for Trump. In fact, they kept begging me for Trump buttons and Trump hats and Trump signs, and I had to go spend money out of my pocket because they don't give that stuff away.
Very, very Trumpian, I guess. Curtis, were you surprised?
Yeah, I certainly was surprised. I thought it'd be a close election, but I didn't think that Trump would win. And in all honesty, Hillary has won the popular vote, it looks like, and so the Electoral College has its ups and downs. There's a bipartisan group in the Senate. I've co-sponsored. I don't know if you have, but they actually go for the national popular vote, which actually was a pretty Republican idea. But,
it was.
But it looks like if the system's rigged, it seems pretty interesting that the one with the most votes doesn't win.
Right.
But
were you even more surprised by Michigan?
I was very surprised by Michigan, but I think that there's a underlying anger of people out there that don't think either party has spoken to or worked for them, and that we've got two corporate parties in a lot of ways, and that I think Democrats have to get better and back to our roots and talking to working men and women, being respectful of their beliefs, and getting back to the roots what the Democratic Party was about. And I think that this is probably an example of that not working really well, and people upset that the two parties really are just yelling at each other and not getting anything done, and people are frustrated, so an outsider won. And that's going to happen sometimes. But I do think it should be a wake-up call for our party a little bit, too.
All right, John.
I am surprised, however, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was at the West Michigan Policy Forum, and Newt Gingrich was one of the speakers, and I told him afterwards, I said, this feels a little bit like 1990 when John Engler won. Just from the standpoint of a lot of people saying, they'll look around behind their back, see who's around, and go, I'm voting for Trump. But they wouldn't admit it publicly and openly. But that said, I bought into all the punditry and all the pollsters and never saw this kind of wave coming.
And I want to follow up on that, but Kelly, surprised?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely surprised. And what I think we saw is, number one, that the anger and frustration that Curtis talked about, but also the pollsters, their numbers were so off. And I think people were not willing to acknowledge support for Donald Trump because they knew it wasn't perceived as the right thing to do, because he's not, he's allowed hate to be okay. And I think that's, John and I have talked about this a lot. We come from different sides of the aisle. We're used to winning and losing. We totally get a partisan win or loss. But in this case, the man who's going to be president of our country has been very visible with vitriolic language against gays, women, blacks, Hispanics. He's allowed hate to be okay, and that's different than just a straight partisan loss. That's a real fear that I believe people are sensing. People who don't look like us feel
but
that.
Do you think that he won because of that or despite that?
Well, that's a great question, and I hope that it is despite that rather than because of that. But it's really important, Bert, to think about Burl, for crying out loud. Okay, clearly I've only had a couple hours sleep. But it's important to realize that Donald Trump pulled 12 counties that were Democratic 4 years ago. He pulled those counties, including Eaton County, which you know, Rick, has been going Democratic the last couple of races. What was it? Saginaw,
Genesee, and into
some
the
really traditionally Democratic. Not when you ran, of course. But those are the kinds of counties that I think are reflective of the population you were talking about, which is, blue collar working men and women who don't feel the parties really address their needs.
Right.
Well, so if he won despite that, did she lose because she was simply not a strong enough candidate? I mean, she underperformed compared to Obama 4 years ago. Now, Trump did do better than Romney, but how much of it is your candidate's fault?
Well, I think Hillary Clinton is probably one of the most qualified people to ever run for office, but she's not a great politician. She hasn't done so I think that's an issue. I think too often she has a tendency to talk in terms of I and not as we. And to talk about things that she's done and not about things that she's going to do for voters. And I think that sometimes is a problem. And I think we forget sometimes as public servants and as politicians that elections are not about us, they're about the people. And so she certainly had high negatives, but if you look at the actual race, his negatives were actually higher than hers among the polling. So there was one point where someone said that either of these candidates, the only person they could beat was the person they were running against, and maybe that ended up being true. I am surprised at the number of women that voted for Trump. When you look at that number, considering, some of the pretty awful things that were said and the serious allegations about sexual assault, which I think we need to take seriously. I was shocked at the number of women that were still willing to vote for Donald Trump. That did very much surprise me, and I'm surprised that the idea of the first woman president. I have a daughter. We've had 5 hotels that have been elected to office now, and none of them have ever been a female. And I don't know if my daughter will want to do that one day, but I want her to be able to believe that she can. And this idea that there hasn't been a female president in all this time in this country, I thought that would have translated better among the female vote. And it seems like with white women specifically, that didn't happen in the election.
I want to ask the Republicans. John Truscott, of course, was press secretary to Governor Engler and advises Republicans, and Rick Jones is an elected Republican. What does Trump's victory mean to the Republican Party in Michigan, if anything, or is it an anomaly?
I don't think it's an anomaly at all. When you look at the trend across the country, and that Republican governors have control of 33 states, an historic level that's never happened before. This is more of a sweep of, we're fed up with the system the way it is, and we're going to change it. And I think that emanated from Washington, not necessarily at the state level, but it resulted in states going Republican in record numbers. So,
but John, why didn't the House turn over in Michigan and become Democratic then, if it was a change election?
It was changed from what's going on in Washington.
Why?
And the frustration. And let's look at it. One, she was not a very good candidate. And I was saying that from the beginning. When you looked at parking your van in the handicapped spot and having the photo taken. And just stupid little things early on that a good, well-organized campaign doesn't fall into those traps to, at the end, WikiLeaks, FBI, it was more than a drip, drip, drip. It was like a waterfall cascading of negative information.
No, it was not a waterfall. It was not a waterfall. And
for Republicans, it was, because, and here's why. Because even if people said, well, this one issue may not matter to me, you start hearing all of the issues, and then the Clinton Foundation information that was coming out, and all of this stuff, I think people just said, you know, we're done. We need somebody who we may not believe in, but they don't have the ethical problems or the potential criminal problems. And when Comey came out on Sunday and said, you know, we've reviewed 650,000 emails, which is an impossibility, and so there's nothing there. And that's the whole rigged system. All this stuff played in.
I don't know if it's impossible. I the FBI director. There's new technology now that can actually look through emails and can tell most of them were duplicates. I mean, I think that it was unfortunate the FBI director actually put out the initial statement, because I think that actually turned the election and gave people a reason and excuse to vote for Donald Trump. But certainly, if we're looking at both of them, they both had ethical issues along the campaign, and I think it's.
Rick, what does
Well,
this
the
mean?
original question you said, what does it mean to the Republican
Right.
Party? I think it means the Republicans are starting to tire of Tea Party people. They're looking more at a populist, somebody that speaks the language they want to hear. Now, not all the rhetoric and things that he said, I don't agree with all that, of course, but he spoke to the people, and that's what they want to hear. They're tired of the party, and they're tired of dynasties. They didn't want Jeb Bush. They didn't want another Clinton.
Now, what happens to the
that's
Republican
interesting.
Party with Donald Trump as the new head of it? Does he take these people to the Trump party? What do you think happens?
I think the same thing that's happened here in Michigan. Governor Snyder was more of an independent businessman. Trump will be an independent businessman. He'll have different ideas. They won't be party regular ideas.
Well, I'll say this: if we still have a country in 2 years, and I hope we do,
We
that was a joke.
We
That was
will.
I'm sorry, but I think it'll be a great year for Democrats in Michigan, and that we might look back on this and actually say that that although Trump may not be the best thing for the country or what I care about for the country, it might be a great thing for actually the Democratic Party in Michigan, because I think that the off-year election is always good. He's already very unpopular. You add those things together, and we're going to have a state house election. We're going to have a new governor. We're going to have a state senate campaign going. And I think we'll pick up massive seats because of Donald Trump being president. I'm very excited for 18.
I mean, we on the Democratic side, we're mostly talking about Gretchen Whitmer and Dan Kildee. On the Republican side, though, we're mostly talking about Bill Schuette, who's much more like Donald Trump.
Bill Schuette might have had the worst night of anyone last night, actually, in terms of, because Donald Trump being president makes it much harder. It's already hard after 8 years to actually get the same party elected governor. It's happened very few times in Michigan's history. And when you add that to the fact that off-year elections are terrible for the party of the president in power, I think Bill Schuette might be the biggest actual loser of last night with Donald Trump actually
Do you see
becoming
anything
president.
to fear in 2018?
I don't. I think Bill Schuette was the winner last night. Clearly, Brian Kelly was the loser, because
Why?
of the remarks he had made about, I can't vote for Trump, I can't support Trump. And Schuette said he's our party leader.
Right. Of course, what we don't know is what things will be like in our country 2 years from now, because we have such an unknown. I want to, John, I tried to get you to tell me whom you were supporting before the election. You said you weren't supporting anybody. I'm asking you now, how do you feel about Donald Trump as your president?
I voted straight Republican ticket. And I tell you,
What decided you?
the FBI. When Comey opened this up, and then how they responded, and it was just it just kind of put me over the top. And then the hearing that Chelsea Clinton used foundation money for a wedding dress, and just all this stuff, this cascade of information. I'm not the only person that felt this way.
It's like going to
And then I'll tell you,
Breitbart.com.
and I told Kelly, my brother called me Sunday when Comey said, "Oh, there's nothing there," and he said he just gave this to Trump. Because I think there are a lot of people looked and said this system is so flawed and so rigged that's we're
I think
we're
some
going
of
to
us
send a
agree
message.
it was rigged.
We are going to send a message, and I really think that's what happened.
So what I think, Burl, what our challenge is, individually and collectively, is for both parties to really get back to their roots and really go back to representing the people. I think it's clear that people do not feel their elected officials are really in tune. And I don't know how much of it's reflected at the state level as it is reflected at what came about at the federal level. But this was really, at least in Michigan, it was a Republican tsunami. It really was. I mean, again, Republicans picked up 12 counties they didn't have 4 years ago. They increased their margin in seats like the state rep seat you used to have, Senator, that has gone back and forth between Deb Shaughnessy, Teresa Abed, Tom Barrett, and Tom retained the seat with a bigger margin than it's been won or lost in a long time. So it'll be really interesting. I agree with Senator Hertel that in 2 years, pendulum will very likely swing back. But we've got to, as Democrats, we have to really get back to our roots.
One thing I do want to throw out was looking at the how Trump and Clinton did versus each other. The final tally is about 13,000 votes separated them. Gary Johnson got 173,000 votes. Is he the Ralph Nader of Michigan in this election?
He's the Ralph Nader of the entire election, if you look at it that way. I mean, in every single swing state, the Gary Johnson number is bigger than the number between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Now, whether those votes would have gone to one or the other, who knows? But there were a lot of people that I feel, a lot of young people who felt disaffected with the race and who who normally would vote Democratic and who voted for Gary Johnson. It's ironic because they were largely Sanders supporters, and if you looked at Sanders and Gary Johnson on a sheet of paper, they probably believed the exact opposite things, but they were both outsiders, and I think that people are tired of the same old system.
Do you think we'd be looking at a different result today if Bernie Sanders had been the candidate?
Possibly. I think they probably would have attacked him on slightly different issues. But I think almost, I think that somebody that didn't have some of the baggage to give people the excuse to vote Donald Trump. I mean, I don't think that the FBI emails, the fact that Anthony Weiner had emails on his server have anything to do with Hillary Clinton, actually. It was a nice thing to bring up, right. But I'm not sure why it would change your vote, to be honest with you, because it was not her fault that Anthony Weiner had some emails left over on a...
I'm going to start telling people you were affected by Anthony Weiner's emails.
I mean, I'm glad that Carlos Danger was also part of the campaign again, but I'm not sure what that ethically had to do with Hillary Clinton at all.
It's the question. It's the specter of the corruption that everybody kind of thought is there. But you don't know specifics, but we just know something's wrong with them.
But you know what?
Why did they change your
vote?
But
the millennials felt there was corruption because my daughter, public school teacher, wanted Bernie. And she felt he was cheated out of the position he should have had. And that's why you had people going libertarian.
I've heard that from some people, definitely, and I'm very curious. I don't think it's so much what would have happened if Bernie Sanders had been the candidate. I think it's what would have happened if it had been John Kasich and Joe Biden. That would have been a very different kind of a race altogether. And I don't think any of us would be as concerned with the outcome. I mean, we'd be worried about partisan issues, but we wouldn't be worried about some of the issues that I think are really at the core of some of us who voted for Hillary Clinton. And that is that vitriolic verbal assault on all kinds of folks.
Let's talk about some things that might happen in a Trump administration and how it could affect Michigan. For now, the Republicans actually could repeal Obamacare. What would that mean to health care, to Michigan citizens, and particularly what would it mean to the future of the expanded Medicaid? Senator Jones?
Well, I think it's a possibility Obamacare could be repealed. Certainly the cost has gone up horribly, unlike what everybody said at the beginning. I think there's a possibility it could be replaced. What else would it mean to Michigan? Well, if they literally built a wall, where would we get people to pick our crops?
But
we have
Senator,
to have a
replacing it, if the Republicans have a plan for replacing it, I've yet to hear it.
I think we're going to hear it from Donald Trump.
I think that's the problem, right? So right now, for all the talk about the expanded premiums, and yes, there are some expanded premiums, and we should be trying to fix that. More people in this country than ever before at any time in our history have health care coverage because of the Affordable Care Act. Medicaid expansion has been wonderful for this state. Actually, it's saved lots of money in our insurance industry, and more people are getting coverage, and more people are getting access to basic primary care. That's a good thing, and I think it's the greatest thing that this governor's done. If you guys look at what the best thing that Rick Snyder has done as governor, it's been the expansion of Medicaid in the state. That can all go away now, having Republicans control all of Congress. And they keep saying repeal and replace. Nobody, the only idea I've heard that any of them talk about is health savings accounts. You can't have a health savings account if you're poor. That doesn't make any sense. If you don't have the money to put in there, it doesn't make any sense. So what are they going to do? That I think the Affordable Care Act is actually the biggest issue for me, where I could see them repealing it, and that would be the wave that would take Democrats back to the winning lines in 2018.
I do know, and I do have to confess, I have not read it, but heard Speaker Ryan talking last week. Yeah, they have a plan. They've laid it all out. It's on the website. Go read it for yourself. So whatever's in there, it's a plan. Then today I saw, and I think it was Senator Shirkey who posted it. He said, here's how you do it. One, you can give people a voucher. It's a heck of a lot cheaper to give people the money than to run this huge federal program, and then give them a tax credit on their taxes. Now everybody has to become an informed consumer. They have insurance, they save the money, and the whole system is cheaper, and the system has to be more interactive and responsive to the actual patient.
Well, I don't mean to I like Senator Shirkey, he's a friend of mine, but the problem with that plan is that people get catastrophically ill and end up in bankruptcy, will not be able to actually use a voucher at that point. The voucher only would cover basic primary care. You still have to cover the people in the most expensive situations.
Well, nobody defined the rate or what you're going to pay. It's cheaper to pay for full insurance for people individually, or for the people who didn't have insurance, than it is to run Obamacare.
My point is that a voucher system doesn't. You're just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. You're giving people money to pay for their basic primary care. You still got to pay for the catastrophic care no matter what.
And it's an issue that
it's cheaper to include catastrophic care than to run Obamacare.
Every time you say cheaper, you reinforce the question I want to ask, because in 2018, the Republicans are going to have to deal with it was cheaper in Flint. And cheaper doesn't necessarily mean better. What is the Republican solution to giving people the opportunity for great health care? Everybody complains on the Republican side about Obamacare. What's the Republican solution?
Read the Speaker's plan. I confess, I have not read it. But we do know the current system is unsustainable. And when you add up just all the health care programs, and this includes Medicaid and Medicare, which nobody's talking about getting rid of, but within a couple of years, that's going to be between 25 and 30% of the federal budget. Right now, with debt the way it's going, it's about 22% of the federal budget. There's not a lot left over for all the other programs that we depend on the federal government to provide.
And doesn't that then create a problem for Trump? He wants to cut taxes when costs are going up.
There are certain people, and I'm sure the senator may agree with me, that are a little more supply sider. History has shown, going back to President Kennedy and many others, that you can cut taxes and increase revenue. You can cut the corporate income tax rate and actually bring trillions of dollars onshore to be invested and created jobs. You'd start to build the pipeline and create tens of thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. It's through growth that you actually can create that revenue coming in.
Well, that doesn't jive with what Representative Stockwell said when he was running that for Reagan. He said that was all smoke and mirrors.
Well, the problem with that is that I think that's a basic misunderstanding of how the free market works. Corporations don't create jobs because they want to or they feel good about it. They do it because there's a market of their product. You build an economy through the middle class. That's what we did in the 90s. That's what Bill Clinton did, and that's what worked. No one's Jim Hudgens, the guy who runs Jim Hudgens. He runs the mobile station. Told me, if you want me to create a job, don't cut my taxes, because I'm not creating any jobs. You cut my taxes. If you cut everybody else's taxes and they buy more products, I'll go out and create jobs. That's what actually builds an economy. And I think this idea that we just give corporations free money and they'll just do the right thing hasn't really worked, and in a global economy, it makes even less sense because
it's not free money. It's their money that's sitting overseas because it's too expensive to bring it back and invest it here.
And if you want to know
we've
why,
tried one-time repatriations before. It hasn't actually really worked that well because they actually get a better rate and get cheap workers someplace else.
Not in Ireland where most of this money is sitting.
if you want to know why the union workers voted for Trump, NAFTA. They're tired of their jobs going
NAFTA.
overseas. Trump said, let's bring the jobs back. That's the key. That's why they got the vote here in Michigan.
I think we should have better trade deals. That's a good point. But Republicans are the ones that have actually supported business trade deals for you. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has supported trade deals across the entire nation. They're the ones pushing for free trade, and I think it's a little ridiculous to think.
Let me turn to another topic, Kelly. What do I tell my millennial twin daughters about what happened yesterday?
So you tell them the same thing I told my young adult children who were texting off and on all last night and this morning. Mom, what do we do now? What happens to our country? And you just have to say it's going to be fine. Country will, in fact, be fine. There are enough smart people, enough good people that they'll ensure that nothing horrible really happens.
All right, let me ask you this. We've gone through a period where a lot of people think that racism came to the fore because we had a black president. How much, if any, do you think this was a sexist repudiation of Hillary Clinton?
I hate to think that it was gender-driven in any way, shape, or form. It's hard to imagine, though, that people willingly voted for someone who was so filled with, or at least verbalized hate, not just against women, but against gays, against Muslims, against people of other ethnicities. That is incredibly troubling. I mean, he was an equal opportunity offender. His vitriol was not limited to women. And I hope to God that that was a front that we will never see again. This man's going to be our president. And if he thinks it's okay to continue to spout that stuff, we're in deep trouble.
John, do you think
we just are?
Do you think the man who ran is the man who will be president?
No, I think, while typically people run to the extreme in a primary and come back to the middle in a general, I think this is one where he stayed where he was, but will come back to the middle as president. We saw the tone of his speech, his acceptance speech, and things like that, and I think we'll see more of that. We don't really know what his policies are. He ran a very Governor Snyder-like campaign and was on general themes, not specifics. But I will say to Kelly's point,
we got 10 seconds.
Well, your previous question, I think the vote was more people see their country changing in ways that they didn't like. It's the little things. It's the Colin Kaepernick protest of the national anthem and things like that, one after another, that everybody can identify with just one of those issues, and they were upset with the changes they saw.
Go. I want to thank all of you, and everybody have a great weekend, and we'll see what happens in 2020.